everyone, welcome to another episode. Today I'm super excited because as you can see, today is our first ever episode in English. I'm really nervous, of course, because, well, English is not my first language. But the guest of today had to be interviewed in English, so I'm really excited to be with him today. Today we have Mack Moyer, and I met him a few years ago because I was his teacher, actually, of Spanish. And on the first class we had ever, he said a lot of things that really impacted me, and I was really surprised by it. So I just reached out to him and I was like, we have to do an episode about this because it's so interesting the way you view life. He's a scuba diver. He's currently sailing. He is a professional traveler and he has backpacked throughout a lot of countries. And he has lived outside of the US a long time, but I'm not going to tell you all about it. He's going to tell you all about it. So welcome back. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you very much. And I was pretty honored when you first reached out to me and asked if I would be one of your guests. I know that doing it in English is probably difficult for you. Maybe if I was a better student of yours, we could have done this in Spanish, but I'm sorry. It's really hard to learn another language when you're my age, I guess.
And it's Spanish. Spanish
and you don't practice as much, but I should learn it. I have a lot of reasons to learn it. I need to get back into it. Just need to be able to balance my work with it. So
very good. So okay, Mack, let's dive into it. Tell me your story, all about you.
Oh man. All right. Well, based on what you just introduced me as, I guess we should talk a little bit about the traveling. But I'm originally from a small town in Maryland, which is on the east coast of the U.S. I was born and raised there, and my family never traveled. In fact, I don't believe anybody in my family ever even had a passport. So I wasn't really raised in a traveling family. But I guess I always had this hunger to go and see the world a little bit. But I didn't really have a dream to go and do and build the life that I have now. This did actually just come through a series of decisions that I made and led me into this. And the more I did it, the more I wanted to do it more. So graduated from university in the US and with a degree in marketing. And I had a job, but I wasn't happy with it. And I kept it for about 6 months. And in the back of my mind, I kept replaying a conversation that I had with the guy that I sat next to at my college graduation. I asked him what he was going to do. We had just graduated together with business degrees. And he said, I'm going to go teach English in China. And I thought, you're going to be a teacher? You just got a business degree. Why are you going to be a teacher? And he goes, I'll go travel the world on somebody else's dime for a year. And then I'll come back and I can start then. And as I was becoming increasingly unhappy with the job I was in, I kept thinking about that. So I reached out to him. Long story short, he hooked me up with a recruiter that placed him. And 4 months later, I found myself in Korea, South Korea, Seoul to be exact. And I didn't know what I was doing. I had never taught before. I was fresh out of college, never been to Korea. Didn't know anything about the food, the language, had no friends there. It was a complete just jump into the unknown. And it was really my first time taking such a leap. I wanted to kind of hit the reset button. I was in a relationship as well that I wasn't really happy with. I was at a job I wasn't happy with. And I felt like this was a really good way to kind of hit the reset button. And I didn't even really do my research. I kind of, for some reason, had envisioned that Korea was going to be like this jungle and I was going to be teaching kids on a jungle floor. I don't know what I was thinking, but come find out Korea is actually very tech savvy and it ended up being way more sophisticated than even America was. My students back in 2007, they had phones that had antennas and were watching live TV, and I had never seen that before. It was amazing. Really cool experience. I stayed there for 3 years, and I actually found that I genuinely loved to teach. By chance, I just really, really enjoyed it, and I really liked being in South Korea. But I did want to leave and try new experiences and try teaching different age groups because I was teaching young elementary school students at the time. And so I had this idea that if I went to Turkey, it would be a little bit warmer and I'd be closer to Europe, which is where I wanted to travel more. So I moved to Turkey. And I found some part-time jobs, but honestly, nothing that paid very well. And so I was continuing to look. And after a couple of months in Turkey, I got offered a role to be a teacher to adults, which is what I was looking for at the time, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Now, keep in mind, this is 2009. So this is not the Saudi Arabia that you might be seeing on the news today. That is very much more progressive and kind of catching up finally. This is the time that the religious police had full control. This is the time that they, no joke, were still doing public beheadings every Friday in the town square. This is the time that you couldn't speak to a woman. Women couldn't drive or vote. It was a very conservative time. And you might ask, well, why in the hell would you take that job?
And stay there.
Well, I haven't said how long I stayed there, but yeah, I get that. The truth is two reasons, really. I mean, one, I think financial freedom is super important to me. I knew that going to Saudi Arabia, they paid much, much better than any other teaching job out there because people are simply scared to go there. And so they were offering me a salary that would allow me to pay off my school loans, as well as some other debt that I had from a stupid decision of wrecking a motorcycle when I was young. Very quickly, within a year, it would allow me to do that. And so I viewed Saudi as an opportunity to release that anchor of needing a job. As soon as I was debt free, it would allow me to kind of see the world and do whatever I want. And I don't have to make $200, $300 a week. I just have to make whatever I need right now. And so I recognized the risk and I was scared. But I thought 1 year there, I'll learn a lot about a culture I don't know anything about. I'll save some money, or I'll pay off some debt rather, and then I'm free and I can go and do whatever I want. Because ultimately, where I wanted to go and teach was in South America, but it was very difficult to make the money I needed in order to pay my American school bills. And so, yeah, I jumped off the deep end again and I hit that reset button again, and I ended up in Saudi Arabia. Scared out of my mind, but excited about learning new things and going to a place that most people have never been allowed to visit, because at that time there was no tourist visa. And sure enough, as I've found over the course of my years of traveling, is what you read on the newspapers or see on the news or on social media is quite often not the real reality. Saudi had its problems and it was scary at times, but for the most part, it really wasn't at all what I would have expected after even doing research to go there. It was conservative, but not to the extreme that I was expecting. And I actually met some of the best friends, people that I still talk to on a daily basis now there. I dated a girl for 8 years. I traveled the world. Saudi Arabia is actually, if you know anything about geography, it's actually located in a really great place for travel, because on that peninsula, within 3-hour flights, you can be to Africa, Asia, or Europe. And as an American, that's really difficult, because in order to leave America, you got to cross an ocean for the most part, or unless you're going to Central or South America. And so I was able to do, I have a 4-day weekend. I can pop over to India. And I did. I went to the Taj Mahal one time on a weekend trip because I had an extra day off. I went up to Istanbul on a regular basis for work, and that was just a hop, skip, and a jump away. And I went to Ethiopia on a vacation one time because it was, 2.5 hours away. So it allowed me such a lifestyle that I had never expected. It allowed me to travel the world. It allowed me financial freedom, because 1 year I was able to pay off all that debt. And then I ended up staying for 8 years in total. And so that 7 years allowed me to not only have that freedom to travel, but to really kind of save, invest, and set myself up in the future there. So that really risky decision that I know quite a few people who are given that opportunity and people were just scared to take the risk really resulted in some great things for me. It's not always the case for everyone, but for me, it worked out pretty well. But after 8 years there, I stopped teaching after 4, and I moved to the business side of education. So I started working with, at that time, it was universities and textbooks for them. So I was working with a publishing company. But it allowed me to focus a little bit more on my career. And I got to work for a really big name company that gave me a lot of credibility and taught me a lot. And I also completed my MBA. But after 8 years, I realized I had been there long enough, and it was time to hit that reset button again. I kind of have a theme.
Oh my God.
I kind of have a theme where I like to hit that reset button, wipe it clean, and go somewhere new. And I've learned over 20 some years of traveling now that's kind of that's just me. I don't want to build my life with possessions. I like to build it on experiences. And so it's sometimes nice when you hit that reset button, you sell everything you have and you have no responsibility except for, yourself, and then you pack a bag and whatever on your back is what you have, and you go and you build something from scratch, and you take the lessons with you and you take the experiences with you to build a better life there. Definitely not for everyone, but I've always enjoyed that. And so I quit my job. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I had saved up enough money to do some traveling, and I wanted to follow a dream. So I bought a one-way ticket to Brazil. And the plan was to do 6 months around South America, which is one of my least traveled continents, simply because it was far away from Saudi Arabia. I was able to do Europe, Africa, and Asia pretty easily, not South America. So I spent 6 months. I had a general idea, but one of the things that I wanted to do during this trip was I wanted to work on, since I wasn't going to have a job, I wanted to make sure that I was still pushing myself to be better. And so I found one of the things that I wanted to work on myself on in some personal development was to not be so rigid. I'm a planner. Like, I love to plan, and my friends love to go on trips with me because I plan everything and they don't have to do anything. And so, I would even have a cover page with all the tickets here, all the accommodations here, all the day trips there. One of my friends, he loves teasing me. He'd wake up, okay, Mac, what's for breakfast? Where are we going? What are we doing? What is at 8:07? What is at 9:10? He was like really, really, he jokes a lot about it. But planning is good. But it, just like with everything in life, any extreme can be bad. And what I wanted to work on was to be more flexible and to not have a plan that would make me do something when maybe I meet somebody and they're going to see a waterfall today, and I really want to go see the waterfall, but I can't because I had already paid for this. And so I gave myself a rule, and I said, I'll never plan more than 2 days in advance. I'll have a general itinerary I want to follow, and I'll have some milestones. And that milestone for me was actually a wedding I needed to be at. So I knew I needed to be in Lima, Peru for a wedding at this date. I think it was April. And then I actually had tickets to the World Cup in Russia that year. So I knew I needed to be in Russia in July. So I was like, okay, these are the things, and here's what I want to do in between. So if I have to be in Lima in April, then I got to keep moving. And so kind of did that. And I broke my rule a few times, and I have to say I regretted it every time I broke it, because every time I broke it, I had to miss something, an opportunity that I really wanted to do at that moment. And so what I learned to do was to have a strategic overview, but not a detailed plan, and let me be more kind of flow with the wind. And really what that allowed me to do, after I finished my 6 months there, I went to Russia for the World Cup, and then I said, let me keep going. And I had done a lot of Europe at that point, but I hadn't done a lot of Eastern Europe, like Ukraine and Moldova and Belarus. So I took the opportunity to finish off the countries I hadn't been to in Europe, and now I've been to every country in Europe. And then I had another wedding in Singapore. So I flew to Singapore, and then I figured, hey, I'm in Southeast Asia. I might as well finish the countries I haven't seen here. And I did a lot of scuba diving because as you mentioned in the intro, I love to scuba dive, and Southeast Asia is my favorite place to do that. So I did a lot of scuba diving, and I got to visit a lot more countries there. And then two of my best friends live in Australia. So I figured, okay, I'll go to Australia, and kind of almost doing a world tour. I just skipped Africa, really, is the only place I skipped. But then my grandmother got really sick, and I was very close with my grandmother. So I had to come back after 15 months. I wasn't ready to be done, but I figured I've done a lot. I want to come and spend some time with her in her final months. And I was very fortunate. I got to come back and spend the last 6 months of her life with her. I didn't get a job. I spent all that time with her. And again, this is all thanks to my time in Saudi. Saudi really enabled me to financially freedom to do this. But I was starting to kind of run low at this point. It's one of those things, you can't go forever, but it was something that helped. And so spent some time with my grandmother. And while I was back in America, I never intended to stay in America. I felt like I had become an expat at this point. I had lived outside the US for almost 14 years at this point. And so I wasn't planning on coming back to America. My plan was be there with my grandmother and then go back somewhere else. But But being home made me realize how much I missed my family, I think. Before that, I'd not been home for a Christmas in 14 years. I usually would come home for 2 weeks a year, and I tried to make it in the summer because I hate the cold. And, I'd come home in 2 weeks in the summer, and then I'd go and keep traveling. And so traveling was my priority, where I felt like my priority might be shifting a little bit more to being home. And in the time I was home, my little brother and my little sister got married and had a baby. My grandmother passed away. And actually, when you and I were together, my mother passed away suddenly. And so it wasn't by this design, I didn't deliberately know any of that stuff was going to happen, but it worked out really well for me. I guess I'm a lucky guy, but I got to do a lot of traveling there. And then I came home, got a job that took me to New York, which I'm very happy with because it's a very diverse city and kind of lets me still feel like sometimes I'm traveling because I meet people from all over the world. And to be honest, all of my friends from every corner of the world want to come to New York. So I still get to see a lot of them, but yet I'm really close to home. I'm about 4 hours away from my family. And so my mom passing was really, really hard. It was sudden and unexpected. And so being here for that made me realize, man, I'm glad I didn't go back overseas, because that would have been a really hard thing to be over there and know that my family is suffering that without me. And so now I'm still based here. Sometimes I get the itch to go, but I try to satisfy those itches with, travels here and there. I'm actually headed to Italy on Sunday, and I'll be there for 2 weeks. I recently was married. I got married in April, and my wife has always wanted to go to Italy, so I promised her a trip there. And it's not a honeymoon because I also invited my father.
So romantic.
He's going to be the third wheel, but the three of us are going. He's never been to Europe, so I'm excited to take them and let them kind of start opening the world to them. I think it's really important to see the world for a lot of different reasons. It's become a passion of mine to experience new cultures, try new foods, meet new people, but also to allow and enable other people to do the same, because especially, and I don't know if you or how many of your listeners follow American politics closely, but certainly feels like it's just getting more narrow and narrow and narrow, and people are this or that. It's black or white. And I can promise you perspectives change when you start to travel. And so, I want to enable and help as many people to see the world, because it's pretty amazing. Anyway, that's a long version of my story. I hope that was what you were looking for.
Yeah. I have so many questions. But I personally had to do the reset button 3 times in my life. But it was like not my decision, because I was like a teenager and my parents went here and there. So I had to go with them. And looking back to that is like one of the best things that ever happened to me. Like being able to just take a bag and pack your life in a bag and just go. It's so amazing. But since you've done it so many times and you've packed everything and like start over. And in so many different places, I've not left like America for my living. Did you ever felt like you were like you didn't have like a home, or that you were like rootless and you didn't have like roots in any place, or that wasn't something for you?
I had a strong family. I had growing up for 22 years, I was in the same place. So I had roots, but there were times definitely where I felt like I didn't connect with any of those people. A lot of those people. It's not that they haven't traveled. Some people have traveled in my hometown. But I do find that on average, I think the statistic is something like more than 60%. It used to be more than 70, but more than 60% of Americans don't have passports. So if they do travel, they're traveling within the country. And to be honest, there's an argument for why. And I don't ever defend that argument, but I understand that argument. And part of it is, well, one, Americans don't get vacation nearly as much as everybody else. It's actually not even a law that Americans have to have vacation. Employers do not have to provide any vacation for their employees. And so a lot of American workers, especially maybe lower income jobs, they either have none or maybe they start with 2 weeks a year. Two, it's farther to travel for us. We have to cross an ocean to get to Europe. Whereas, if you live in Germany, it's pretty easy to pop over to France or down to Italy. If you live in Asia, it's not that far to go to these places. In America, we have 2 oceans on either side of us. Now, of course, we could go south. And a lot of people do, but it's really kind of overrun with tourism islands that are cruise boat stuff. And in my opinion, it's not my type of travel. I get it why some people love that, but it doesn't give you an opportunity to see a culture. If you're on a cruise boat and you have a 9 to 5 window to go out there, do everything you can and come back, it's just not my type of travel. And so the other reason as well is in America, it's a beautiful, beautiful country, and we have just about anything that somebody would want. So when I say that, is that we have mountains, and we have big mountains. We have deserts. We have big cities, famous cities that are great and lots to do. We have hot, we have cold, we have anything you could want in America, you do have. So sometimes it's like, well, why am I going to go to a country where I don't speak the language and it's maybe not safe, when I can actually, if I want beaches, I'm just going to go to Miami. If I want mountains, I'm going to go to Colorado, those kind of things. And so from that perspective, I understand, but I don't care. I think it's more important to get out and see the world, even if it is the same mountains. Okay, you got Colorado mountains or you have the Alps. Go to the Alps, because you know what? You're going to meet people that have a different perspective, have been raised differently, eat differently, and those types of things. And so I do think that there's value in that, but it's not necessarily a tangible value that many people understand.
Okay. So important, yes. And I remember on our first ever conversation, you were really passionate about the fact that you always push yourself to the most uncomfortable place and to do the most uncomfortable thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think there is a phrase that I used to like to use a lot in my 20s. It was move out of your comfort zone and discover the unknown kind of thing. And it was kind of a motto that I liked to live my life by at the time. It's way before your time. You probably heard of it though, MySpace, and you got to put a little phrase right there. Now I think that was my phrase in MySpace, but I kind of learned to live by that because, as I said, I want to constantly be better. Even when I took that time off I really took my last couple of years in Saudi, I was really focusing on my career and getting that MBA and getting that career experience and business mentors and trying to figure out how I could really set myself up for success in my 30s and 40s. But then when I left that job, I said, okay, I can't just take a break. I need to continue to be better. How can I do that? And that's why I tried to set myself some goals in my travels. And I also, one of the other things I did is I had picked up a lot of spreadsheet skills through my job, and I wanted to make sure I didn't forget them. So I had really kind of built out a full spreadsheet tracking all my expenses and showing different guys, trying to find ways to keep the skills that I had, but also continue to be better in them. And, I gave myself a challenge to read more and stuff like that. So I'm the kind of person that always wants to do better. And I don't think you can learn unless you're moving out of your comfort zone and pushing yourself to be better than you are. A couple of years ago, I think I was 35 or 36. And I think it's important to set goals, different types of goals for different increments. So I always, I've always bought into the whole New Year's resolutions. I love to think, okay, this year, what am I going to do? But you have to take it the next step. What are you going to do in 5 years? Because some things take longer than a year to develop, especially a skill or something like that. And then what are you going to do in 10? I don't know that it makes sense to go much further than 10 because so many things can change. But I like to have a big picture goal. And so I remember when I was 35 or 36, I kind of set some different goals. And all of them were about okay, what do I want to do? And so one of the things was I wanted to pick up a new sport or hobby that would allow me to learn. And you mentioned in my intro that I sail, and that's how I came about sailing. I tried to think about I could do golf, I could do tennis, and they would teach me things for sure. But then sailing became an opportunity living here in New York. And I realized, well, if I sail, I'm going to learn about water currents and stuff like that. I'm going to learn about weather and wind. I'm going to learn about the history of sailing because there's a really long history of that. And to me, it just felt like I was going to get a lot of value from learning how to do that. And I'm 3 years into it now. And I'll tell you, I still learn a lot. I'm probably about as good at sailing as I am at Spanish, but I'm trying. But yeah, I mean, those are the types of things that I like to do that continually push me to learn. And that's been 3 years. I also, I had some financial goals of things I wanted to do and invest in. I had some personal development goals. I had some relationship goals I had for that year, as well as for the 5 years. And I hit 40 this year. And so I kind of went back and I looked at those goals. Actually, I'll pull them up right now. And I didn't hit them all. And that's okay, though. That's the thing that I've learned to accept over the years is if you don't hit all your goals, it's fine. You have a direction you're moving. And sometimes goals change. I honestly, as a traveler and kind of as a nomad, I never really saw myself getting married. I was always on the move. And that reset button is a lot harder to hit when you have responsibilities with someone else. And so it does change things that I'm married now. It's going to be so much harder for me to hit that reset button. And I'm not going to lie, I've wanted to hit it recently due to some issues I've had with my current employer, but it's not that easy anymore. And so you have to find ways to say, okay, maybe I can't just hit the reset button the same way I used to, but we can continually make ourselves better and remove ourselves from situations that maybe need to be taken out of your life. And so that's what I'm currently working on here. Let's see, what were my goals? You'll like this one. I wanted to learn a new language and I gave myself either Spanish or French. And that's why for over a year, I took language classes. So you can't say for sure that I really accomplished that, but I definitely have a much better knowledge of Spanish than I used to.
You're doing really good.
I was, but yeah, I've definitely fallen back on that. I actually had on here that I wanted to learn an instrument, and that was something I felt would really kind of give me more culture and allow me to connect with people that maybe I haven't ever connected to. I've never had a musical or artistic side that I've tapped into. And so I thought that this would be a really good way for me to connect to people that maybe I've never connected to as my travel before. Unfortunately, I never pursued any of that. So that's something that now has been extended into my 45-year plan. Maybe I will, and I think probably it'll just be the piano or something like that. But it allowed me to understand music and the history of that and maybe be able to talk to new people and connect with them. That's my goal, is to find avenues to connect with more people, make myself better so that I can connect with new people and meet new people. Because I think there's so much wealth of information to be learned from people. And it just makes life so much more enjoyable when you're learning things and getting to meet new people instead of just a small little bubble. But I'm an extrovert and not everybody is that. So I get it. I also wanted to learn how to fly a helicopter. Didn't happen. I wanted to buy a bunch of properties and I took a different route with my finance, but I did want to become more involved in volunteering. And I was happy to say that I did participate a lot more in a volunteer program up here in New York. And so I feel like I hit some of those goals, but I also understand who I am and I've adjusted some of them to make more sense to my reality now.
Okay. That sounds really good. And I think sometimes goals can be really overwhelming. Like if you ask someone in their 20s, like, where do you view yourself in 5 years? It's totally going to be overwhelming. But what you're saying, like having a big picture and not being like, okay, I'm going to have this, do this. And it's like really specific. It's really overwhelming. And like for me, it would be really like.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you that it can be overwhelming, but that's if you believe the same way that I did when I was talking about my travel plans and something that if you think it's so rigid and that goals can't adapt and goals can't change over time and goals can't, then yes, it's going to be overwhelming because you're 20, how old are you? 22? 22. There's no way you're going to know what you want to do at 30. But if you know, okay,
like a big
podcast, for example, for whatever reason, you want this podcast to be something. Give yourself a 3-year goal on that. 25 is a good number to kind of shoot for and say, what would you like it to be? And then similar to my travel plan, maybe you don't know how to get from point A to point D, but you have some milestones. And so say, okay, I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it yet. It's going to evolve, but give yourself a milestone and say, okay, by the time I'm 24, I should do this. Otherwise, I'm going to have to adjust the 25 plan and something like that. And so you give yourself a little bit of flexibility within it, as long as you know the general direction you're going. I don't think that has to be so overwhelming if you accept the fact that you're going to think differently when you're 25 than you are when you're 22. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you go out without any goals and go out without any plans, you find yourself quite often, and maybe not for everyone, but I think that a lot of people just find themselves in a mundane routine, and the years slip away and you realize, what the hell have I done with my life?
Yeah.
I didn't push myself. I was comfortable here, but now it's just like I didn't do anything that I wanted to, and I can't, because it's just you start too much to give up. You have a house, you have a car, you have a family, you have all these things, and it's like I can't do it now. And so give yourself those goals. Be flexible with yourself and forgive yourself when you miss them. It's okay. But as long as you have a direction, I think that's the key. And be willing to take risks. I don't know that it would be smart for everyone to go and just drop everything and move to a different country. That's probably not for everyone. But I think you do need to push yourself and take risks. Calculated risks are okay. To be honest, I live in America, and a lot of people would always say to me, "Oh my God, you moved to Saudi. Do you feel safe there?" And I would always laugh, and I'm like, do you know that America has a much higher homicide rate than Saudi Arabia? The fact is, Saudis are scared to come to America because of how much it is. And it's true. In Saudi, at least it was clear that they're conservative, but you know the rules. If you break the rules, yeah, you're going to get in a lot of trouble, and it sucks. But you at least feel safe when you go to a concert or to school or to the movies. In America, you can't feel safe always that way. And so these are the kind of perspectives I'm talking about. I quite often hear Americans say, and it's how I was raised, America's the best, America's the best. And that phrase drives me nuts, because most of the time people who say that are people who've never left America. But even if they have, I often like to follow up that statement with, America's the best at what? Because yes, America is the best at a lot of things, but we're not the best at everything. I can promise you, we don't have the best healthcare system. We don't have the best education system. We don't have the best infrastructure. Like, yes, we're the best at spending money on military for sure, and the strongest military. And so those types of things. I mean, it's not that I'm not a patriot and I don't love my country, but I'm just realistic about it as well, because I've seen other great things about other countries and great ideas that we should be working together on rather than competing, in my opinion.
And Mack, how do you, we get the importance of risks, and I see my mom has a magnet on her fridge that says, leap and the net will appear. Trust the process and just do
I heard
the thing.
That, but I like that a lot. Yeah. Because I always say I jump and I'll find my landing on the way down. I imagine I'm jumping off of a cliff and I don't know exactly where I land, but on the way I'm going to say, oh, that looks soft, I'll go there.
Okay, it's a difference. Yeah, but it works. But sometimes it's really difficult for people. How would you help people, or what would you say to people that are listening to this and are I don't know how to take that step? And it's really easy to let go of this thing when you know what's next. But when you're just leaping and jumping without knowing where you're going to get or if it's going to work out, how do you manage that?
3 things come to mind. And I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to this. And if you ask me again tomorrow, 3 different answers might come to mind. But when you ask that now, the first thing that came to mind is there's always going to be what we call naysayers or negative people around you. You don't know how many times people told me, oh, you shouldn't move to Saudi. That'll be the worst thing you've ever done. Why in the world would you do that? And the truth is, in hindsight, it was probably one of the best decisions I ever did, because it gave me financial freedom. It allowed me to travel the world. It opened up doors that never would have been opened otherwise. So many times people have told me not to take a job or not to do this, not to. There are always going to be negative people that'll give you a million reasons not to take a chance. You have to learn to listen to your gut and follow your gut. You won't always be right. And that leads to point number 2 I was thinking about, is understand that there's no such thing as failure. There's only things as learning. If you understand that, hey, I went to Saudi and I hated it, but you know what? I learned that I don't like it instead of listening to somebody else say I won't like it. That's not a failure, in my opinion. That's a life experience that you can take with you to your grave. And you can say, I know I don't like Saudi because I went to Saudi and I lived there, something like that. And so, listening to people is important. You can't just take stupid risk. All over the news recently has been the Titan submarine that went down, and he ignored a lot of, people cautioning him. And I think that that's a different kind of risks. You're going to have to listen to people, but understand that for many reasons, whether it's jealousy or just overly cautious or whatever reason, there's going to be people say no, and you got to be able to siphon those out and listen to only people that matter. Your mom, for example, might matter, or your wife, or your partner, or something like that. Following your gut, and then also, do your research, understand, the decision you're going to make, do the pros and cons, and say it might go wrong, and if it does, it's okay. It's okay with that. So what if I don't take this risk? What's the alternative? If the alternative doesn't look very good, then if it's boring, if it's just, I stay here. What if I don't quit this job that I hate right now? Well, then I got another year of bullshit, to be honest. And that doesn't sound great either. Like, it's a risk to quit a job and not know what you're going to do. But the alternative is to stay in a job and be unhappy. And who knows, that could be your last year on earth. You could be hit by a bus or have a brain aneurysm and die tomorrow. Like, the alternative isn't any better, in my opinion, sometimes. So that's what I would say. And it's hard. Accept that it's hard. It's never easy. I've hit the reset button a couple of times, and I promise you it's never been easy. But on the other side of it, once you get over that hill, I promise you, you'll appreciate the fact that you followed your gut and you took the risk.
That was a really good answer. Very, very good. And while you were talking, I was thinking about, we tend to think that there's a right and a wrong decision. When I was about to choose the emphasis I was going to take on my career, my dad sat down with me and he was like, okay, there's no wrong decision. You're going to pick a decision where it leads you to meet different people, to learn different things, and you're going to end up being the person that you're supposed to be. There is no way that you're going to choose a thing and be wrong about it, because there's learning in that too. And that's like what you were saying. And I think it's so important to make emphasis on this and be clear that there's no right and wrong decisions. It's just steps and milestones in the way to get to what you want to be. But it's not I made a mistake and now my life is turned completely different. There's almost every time you can stir back and go a different way.
Absolutely. 100%. And I think this could be taken out of context. There are right and wrong decisions in extremes. Obviously, it's never right to hurt someone else or do something like that. But in general, yes, I would agree with you for sure that too many people think of the world in black and white. And the truth is that there's more than a rainbow of colors out there and different paths. And even if two people end up in the same spot, they may have taken very different paths to get to that same spot. And the realities of, to be perfectly honest, I'm a white, heterosexual male that's healthy, living in America. I had a lot of privilege. I did. And I have to accept that. And there's two ways to look at that. I can feel guilty for it, but I can't change the fact of what I have. And so I've always looked at it as, I get that I've been given some privilege in life. It'd be wrong of me not to take advantage of it and enjoy some of that privilege, while at the same time trying to learn about the people who don't have the privilege and trying to help as many of them as possible. So the world is not black and white. And I think that too many people see it that way. So when you start understanding that people may end up in the same spot, they took very different paths to get there. I think your dad gave you some really solid advice there. And I think that that's important to help understand as well when you're going in to make a big decision, especially one that seems like it has a high risk factor. It's not that this is a wrong decision, but if it doesn't turn out the way that I expected it to, or that I wanted it to use this experience to make the next decision a better informed decision and continually improving. That's all you can do. Because if you think of things in black and white, it's so much harder to make a decision. It's so much harder. And so understanding more the fluidity of life. And I've seen this a lot in people. There's one situation I'm thinking about. A friend of mine, she really saw things in black and white when it came to relationships. And she found herself in a very precarious situation that she never imagined she would have been in. And suddenly the world wasn't black and white anymore, because she was like, I never thought I would do this if I was put in this situation. But the truth is I did. And now I get it. I didn't want to do it, but I did. And so she learned from that. And she's also started just being a little bit more flexible with other people, not so judgmental as well.
And I think that must be a thing that you really learn from traveling, like judging people.
Because yes and no. I think there's two sides to this coin, because I would agree with you that I judge people in a different way now. Sometimes the bad side of me, I would say, I lived in the Middle East for 8 years. So I have some generalizations I might say about the Arabs, and people are like, oh my God, that's racist. And I'm like, well, hold on. I've earned the right to say that because I lived there for 8 years. And I know that that is a general statement. I'm not talking about everybody, but I do know that that is a generally true fact based on my experience. Maybe I still shouldn't say those things because they can be misinterpreted for sure. But that allowed me to judge them maybe a little differently. But at the same time, the other side of that, and majority of what you just said is true. Yeah, I judge people a lot less. I grew up in a very conservative Christian home, and I have to be honest. Although we were told not to judge anyone, we inherently judged anybody who wasn't Christians. Moving to the Middle East showed me how very similar religions can be, and how you very much are a product of your environment and the way you were raised. I know that if I was born in India, the chances of me being a Hindu right now would be much higher. If I was born in China or Japan, I would be a Buddhist most likely. If I was born in Mexico, I might have been a Catholic. All of these different things. And so I would have believed it just as much. And so religion was a big eye-opening, not so black and white for me after seeing the world and knowing how much people love. But they love what they were told to love. And honest to God, if they had been born in a different place of the world, they probably would feel differently about that. And so politics also play into that. But these are discussions that probably are best not always had when traveling, because but when I said I sometimes feel like I didn't have roots to my hometown, this is definitely what I was talking about. Is I know that town very well and born and raised there. But oftentimes I would come home and I'm trying to balance not sounding like I'm better than you because I've traveled, but expressing a very different viewpoint and saying, well, you don't really know because you haven't been outside of the US, or you haven't been to all the places I have. And I'm not saying I'm better because I have. I'm just saying I have a different viewpoint because I have. And I differ with you now. I don't have the same opinion as you.
And Mack, what was like for you, like, growing up in a little town, in a Christian town, like just going to Singapore, was it? The first one?
Oh, Korea, South Korea.
Almost. Just like so different, because you didn't go like to a place where you knew the language or the city was like, you went like to the other extreme. So what was like for a 20-something-year-old?
At the time, I had long, blonde, curly hair. I had piercings and I had blue eyes. And Korea was starting to get more and more foreigners come, but they were still a very homogenous people. Koreans, really the traditional Koreans at the time I was there, in my understanding and my experience, they didn't even like try interracial marrying with Japanese or Chinese. The Koreans were pure. They wanted to be pure. And so they started having this influence of foreigners come. And I was part of them. I think while I was there, they hit the 1 million mark. And that sounds like a lot, but in reality, in a country, 1 million foreigners is not that many. And so I was special. And I got a chance to, like I said, I was privileged in a lot of ways that my looks happened to be what they like. And so I oftentimes got treated like a rock star without the money. I was not paid well, but I was moved to the front of lines. And quite often kids would come up, and the Korean word for foreigner is wiggle. Oh, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. And they'd ask me to sign a piece of paper. And in the beginning, I was like, do I look like somebody famous? Why do they want my, but they just loved the foreigner. The blonde hair and blue eyes was, enviable to all of them. And so for me, there was that side of it that was nice and fun, but also there was a reckoning that I had to deal with of starting to question my beliefs. And do I truly believe it, or is this because I was told to believe it and I was born in America? And that took a long time. I think it's still developing. I don't think there's a black and white on this, but in Korea, I definitely felt one way. When I moved to Saudi, my feelings got really strong and I started thinking black and white, but on the other side of the spectrum. Then I realized, it's one extreme or the other extreme is still never good. And I started coming more to the middle. Then my mom passing really kind of took a toll on the belief system and trying to understand. So I think there's a lot of fluidity there. But Korea was what started it all for me. Getting out of my bubble. And a bubble sometimes is different. Sometimes it's a little town, sometimes it's a country. And America would be a very, very big bubble, but it's still a bubble. It's still a bubble. Getting out of that bubble. And I'm not talking going to, I don't want to be judgy here, but getting on a cruise boat and going to Jamaica with a bunch of Americans, you get out, you do a bunch of American things with other Americans, you come back and
it's an extension of the bubble.
That's not out of the bubble. Yeah, I'm talking about getting down and dirty with the locals and understanding and talking to a local and not just asking questions for the sake of asking questions, but genuinely putting yourself in their shoes. Like, my Lord, they grew up here. This is their real life. And, you and I have had a lot of these conversations, Warren, and I often think about what it must be like for you to grow up in Colombia. I love Colombia. It's one of my favorite countries, actually, but you've had a very different experience. And, your bubble is different than mine. Your perspectives are different than mine. In a lot of ways, we probably share a lot of the same values, but the beliefs that we have are different. And I want to learn about that. I think I have a lot to learn from you, even though I might be older and more traveled than you. I think you have a lot to teach me. And so when you start thinking like that, then you don't worry so much about the risk, because the risk of not doing that is worse, in my opinion.
That's so amazing. And to start to close off a bit, I think people, and I don't know if it's mostly in Latin America, we have a view that traveling is really expensive. And the point or the reason why a lot of people don't travel the world is money. What would you say about it? Is there a way that people can travel in a cheaper way? Is it a good investment? About it, what do you think?
Well, those are two very different questions. And I'll start with the second question first. 110%. And in my opinion, I try not to be black and white on anything, but I will always say traveling is the best investment you can make. I promise you, it is a better investment. Experiences over things. That's what I always say. And I have 9 nieces and nephews that are now becoming teenagers and adults. And I try to give gifts to them on their big birthdays or graduations and stuff that are experiences. My nephew, he turned 18 in December, and he loves to drive and go fast. And I found this opportunity that he would be allowed to drive on a racetrack in a Lamborghini 3 times around. It happened so fast. It was 15 minutes and it was done. But I promise you, unless for some reason he gets a lot smarter, he's probably never going to own a Lamborghini. But it was something I know he enjoys, and he can talk about that for the rest of his life. That's something way more valuable than anything else that I could have given him, tangible. And so traveling takes that to the next extreme. Getting to meet you has been incredibly more valuable than any book in Spanish I could have ever bought. And all the people that I've known around the world and the foods I've tried, I'm very adventurous with what I try. I have a rule that if it's truly part of the culture, I'll try anything one time. I'm not going to go and eat something that even the locals don't eat, but I will try anything once. That has taken me to some very
dark places,
disturbing foods, I will say, but it's also pretty interesting, and they're great stories. And you think I'm crazy for doing it or think I'm adventurous for doing it, I don't care, because I know myself and I know that a locals does it. This is his or her real life. I want to experience it, and I could hate it, but I'm not going to die from it. It's fine. So.
Okay. I love it. That is a really.
The second question was, is it affordable? And that is a very difficult question to answer because, again, I come from a little bit of privilege. Not in any. I was not raised with money. In fact, I really had to be. I wouldn't say poor, but I would say very, very close to it. We were paycheck to paycheck growing up. And so it doesn't have to be expensive. But I think the most important thing, and this probably applies more to Americans than a lot of other people, simply because we're a debt society in America. We live off of debt. And it's so easy. As soon as you turn 18, credit cards companies target you and you get caught up into school loans and debt before you even know what happened. You graduate school and all of a sudden you owe a bunch of money to somebody and you haven't even had a chance to live your life yet or work or get a job. And I hate that about America. I don't know if Colombia is the same, but
no, not so much.
So then you guys have an advantage and you guys take advantage of this because it's really important, because the chance that the most freeing feeling I ever had was going to Saudi and paying off that last school loan. Having that financial freedom and starting from zero, you can decide how much travel costs. I didn't travel 15 months on the road because I was just spending money like crazy. I took long buses. In fact, one of the buses to Bogota took me, I think, 36 hours from Quito to Bogota because we had a landslide and it stopped. And like, it's uncomfortable. It was hot. It was sweaty. It was, dangerous roads a little bit, it felt like, but it was cheaper than flying and it's more economical. And you stay in hostels. And honestly, I will always advocate for hostels because not only are you going to save money, but you're going to meet like-minded travelers and you're going to learn. Anybody else, some of the best people I've ever met have been, sleeping above me in a bunk bed and, that kind of stuff. So it's not always comfortable. But if you want to travel, take yourself out of the comfort zone and discover the unknown. I'll keep saying it because it's cheesy, but I like it because it's so true. It's so true about like how I've lived my life and why I've been able to do these things. And you have to remember, every time you spend a little bit extra for something, you're pulling that trip a little bit closer in. So you have to say, is it worth it for me to do this scuba dive? Because this is an expensive scuba dive, which means I might have to shorten my trip by 1 week. Is this worth a week of not traveling? And sometimes the answer was yes. And so I did that. Sometimes it's probably not. I'll do it this way. And so I met a lot of people who went to Saudi. They made the same money as me and they're still in debt because they started making money and they started flying first class because they could afford it now. But then you're just stuck in Saudi and they get tired of being in Saudi because they make good money, but they spend a lot of money. So I do think financial literacy is really important. Understanding money before you start traveling and give yourself a budget. Track your spend. If you're going to do a long trip like I did, I really suggest from the day one, track how much you're spending per night in a hotel and get some kind of average. I know exactly what my average was for my 15 months, which was about $30 a night. And that includes some really expensive stuff in Europe that I just couldn't avoid because it was the summertime and that's a really touristic place. But it also includes some super cheap stuff in like the Philippines for $6 a night kind of thing. And so, but know what track your expenditures on different categories. So you got your accommodation, you got your travel, you got your food, you have your entertainment, stuff like that. And if you know that, knowing it is the first step because you can say, oh my Lord, I'm spending all my money on entertainment. I'd rather keep traveling. That's the first cue right there to say where your priorities are, because a lot of people don't even know what they spend their money on.
And that applies even if you're not traveling.
Yes, that's a whole different passion that I have, which is financial literacy. Maybe we'll do another podcast another day about financial literacy because I need that one. Traveling is definitely my number one passion, but I knew I couldn't get through one podcast without somebody asking me that. And that is definitely the most asked question as a traveler that I get. And it's a really hard answer because similar to saying America is the best country, well, the best at what? I have to say my favorite country for what? Because to be perfectly honest, food is really great in some country. The culture is really great in some countries. The weather is really good. The landscape is good. And I know that that's not what you want to hear. I know that you just want a definitive black or white answer. And so I have come to say my favorite country is this, this, and this. But the truth is if you want my honest opinion, there's a lot of great places out there. I typically tell people, though, Brazil, in a lot of ways, a lot of the things that I enjoy and I like. They've got great food, a beautiful, beautiful country. The people are super nice. I like the language. But really what it is for me is they have an energy that is, I just can't describe it. There's parties in the streets and there's poverty everywhere and there's corruption everywhere, but yet they're happy people. And I like that. I love just walking down the street and on a Tuesday night, they're out there beating their drums and dancing around. And I have this weird feeling. And that's part of the reason why I like New York, because New York also has a similar energy of just an energy that is contagiously good. And so I typically say I really like Brazil, but I also really like Indonesia. And Indonesia, the people are genuinely nice. The food is good, and I love to scuba dive. It's a great place to scuba dive. So those are two of many places I like. I know it doesn't sound real, but I actually do tell people that Colombia is also in my top 5. I know
it's true.
That energy is that I feel in Brazil is also very similar in Colombia. I have a feeling if reincarnation is real, not that I believe in it, but if it was real, in a previous life, I was somewhere born in the South America, and I used to know how to dance and do salsa and speak Spanish. Certainly lost it all in my white boy American life, though.
But it's there somewhere.
It's there. It's deep, deep, deep back there. I just got to find it. That's it.
Yeah, you have to just look for it. Okay, Mack, that's amazing. More than 100 countries, and being able to, with me being pushy for your answer, it's a good, really, really, really good answer. And now to finish, what advice do you want to tell the people that are listening to us today?
Earlier today, I told you that my motto in my 20s was, move out of your comfort zone and discover the unknown. And although I still very much like to live by that, I'm 40 now, and my new, I'd say, life motto has become and evolved into something that I try to tell as many people as possible, which is every day work to build a life that you do not need a vacation from. And that's really what I try to do. If I say I need a vacation from this, then I'm doing something. Too many people live their entire life thinking about retirement. And I promise you, when you're old enough to retire, you're not going to want to do the same things that you want to do in your 20s or in your 30s. And you might be happy in your 50s or 60s when you retire, but you will have missed a lot of opportunity to experience things that you won't. So it doesn't mean you have to retire and travel the world and do all that stuff. Some people don't like to travel. I've met many people that are homebodies and they don't like to travel. I don't understand it, but I understand that they're different, and that's fine. But if they don't like to travel, fine. What does make you happy? And every single day, what are you doing to build that life that allows you to be happy, to be content, and to not need a vacation from it? And the truth is I don't like being content. That's when I get really antsy, and that's when I want to hit the reset button. Every time I've ever hit the reset button was because life was good. Life was like,
comfortable.
I have a house. I have this. What's next? And if I feel like there's nothing to shoot for, then I get super I gotta cancel it and go. And that's being comfortable for me is the most uncomfortable position for me. I want to constantly be pushing myself to be better, to meet new people, to do something else and help more people. It's not just about me either. I want to make an impact on people and encourage them and inspire them to do what they want to do and what they enjoy doing.
Well, this episode is certainly a milestone of that. That's a really good advice. Thank you, Mack, for everything you shared with us, your life story, everything you've learned throughout the years. It's certainly an amazing story, and that's why you impacted me so much in our first class. And I'm so glad that everyone is getting to hear this as well in the podcast. So thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to tell my story. I love telling it, but the fact is I'm only halfway through it. So I'm hoping that the second half of my life is equally inspirational, and if not, and hopefully even more. I have no idea where it's going to go or where it's going to lead, but let's hope it continues. So, and I would like for our paths to cross sometime as well.
Yeah.
Well, I know that you love Colombia, and I know you love Medellin. So we're all here waiting for you, and that's so amazing. I hope you had a really good time recording this, and I hope you really have a good time in Italy next week. And thank you for everything.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.